Mais dans ce moment décisif,
At this decisive moment for the future of the nation, nothing must be as it was before. I would like to take the hand of everyone who would like to work for France to join me. I'm ready to invent something new.
That's the current French president, Emmanuel Macron, having made it through the first round of the country's latest elections.
I will ensure that France will be a power of peace, and I will restore in all areas sovereignty of France. In other words, for the French people, the possibility to think for themselves and to defend their own interests.
His opposition, far-right politician Marine Le Pen, will fight him at the polls on April the 24th. She's well within reach of the presidency. This, her third attempt. But something's changed about her this time.
She has been trying to soften the image of the party in recent years. So she has tried to disown her father while changing the party name. But Jean-Marie Le Pen remains hugely popular among the party rank and file. And crucially, he remains her father.
Both Macron and Le Pen are vying for the votes of left-wing candidates, but are her views on immigration too extreme?
The reason why France might be sleepwalking, so to speak, into electing a far-right president, it's because of tactical voting.
I'm Anna Jones, and this is the Sky News Daily. I'm going to be talking to a professor of French politics who'll be taking us through the elections, how it works in France, and what we could expect in the next round. But first, I'm with Nabila Ramdani, who's a French journalist and has interviewed both Marine Le Pen and her father, Jean-Marie.
I first met Marine Le Pen during the 2007 presidential election campaign, when she was supporting her father, Jean-Marie Le Pen, who was the far-right candidate. It was at an agricultural show in Paris, and she was very much showing off the products of French farming. She was very approachable and happy to speak to me, and she told me that she was proud of her country at every opportunity, really. I met her and interviewed her again on a number of occasions when she was standing herself to become president of France in 2012 and 2017, while she was on the campaign trail engaging with ordinary French people. And during our interviews, she was constantly emphasizing the Le Pen project, which invariably sounded very basic at the time. It effectively boiled down to keeping anything foreign out of France, and she even suggested I might join in with her project at a time when she was seeking to diversify her party so as to change its image. But she certainly appeared very well rehearsed. Marine Le Pen is an assured politician with an excellent media presence. She has the air of someone who has grown up in a show business family, which isn't far from the truth. The never-ending Le Pen family saga is certainly the longest-running soap opera in France.
Well, yes, and you mentioned her father, Jean-Marie Le Pen, of course. And remind us why he is a big figure in France.
My first meeting with Jean-Marie Le Pen was at a rally in Marseille in 2007. He was very fired up and I have to say dynamic. He's a dinosaur in many ways, but in terms of electioneering, he was always very combative and he was almost like a boxer on a ring throwing punches at his political opponents. And at the time, he used very progressive electioneering methods, such as big screens and loud music. And he picked me up as a journalist from a minority background and gave me an exclusive interview telling me about his vision for France. And he was very keen to make out that it was aimed at improving the lives of all French people, except those from a non-French background. And so sending new arrivals back to their place of origin was very much part of his project for France, including French citizens from a foreign background. Now, Marine Le Pen's father is the convicted racist, anti-Semite and Holocaust denier Jean-Marie Le Pen. He created the National Front in 1972. He himself ran 5 times for president, and he was eventually runner-up in the 2002 presidential election against the conservative candidate Jacques Chirac. It was a political coup which was labelled as a thunderclap at the time, and even though he was roundly defeated by Chirac, who won 82% of the vote in the second round, he remained associated with this political earthquake, and to this day, Le Pen Sr. is considered as a veteran politician who has left a distinct mark on the French political landscape.
And the National Front, which he helped found, has now evolved into the National Rally, which is Marine Le Pen's party. So how different a political prospect is she? What are her policies?
Very little has changed in her actual policies. What has changed is the emphasis she puts on them. In recent months, she has focused on cutting the cost of living, for example, while also cutting down on claims that might rightly be described as racist. Le Pen still has ambitious plans to cut immigration down by as much as 75%, for example. She just doesn't go on about it as much. She has always been passionately against Europe, but she knows that leaving the European Union is not a vote winner in a country like France. And she has been trying to soften the image of the party in recent years. So she has tried to disown her father while changing the party name to National Rally in 2018. But Jean-Marie Le Pen remains hugely popular among the party rank and file, and crucially, he remains her father.
She's known as a far-right candidate, but there was a candidate further to the right who ran against her and the other candidates in the first round, Eric Zemmour. So what effect has that had?
So there's nothing particularly new about any of the racism we're hearing about today, except possibly that it's much more high profile. I mean, the emergence of Eric Zemmour as a mainstream TV pundit and then as a mainstream politician has been the most significant development in the advance of France's far-right in recent years. And he's regularly accused of Islamophobia, anti-Semitism, and numerous other hate crimes. But despite all this, Zemmour has a massive constituency, particularly among the middle classes. And while the Rassemblement National was becoming more palatable under Le Pen, Zemmour was going the other way. And Zemmour has in fact helped the National Rally of Marine Le Pen appear more respectable, which is a very dangerous thing, in my opinion. Yes, Marine Le Pen has tried to expel convicted racists and Holocaust deniers like her own father, Jean-Marie Le Pen, out of the party, but there are plenty who remain with very reactionary views, and this bodes very badly for the future.
Well, we've heard about the woman who could challenge the president, but how likely is it that France could wake up after the election with a new far-right leader?
I am Philippe Marlière, Professor of French and European Politics at University College London. There have been dramatic changes recently in French politics. Just to factor in how dramatic they are, let's start with the main one. Until this election, there were two parties which had dominated French political life for the past 40 years or so. On the centre-left, the Socialist Party, if you like, the counterpart of Labour in the UK, and on the centre-right, a post-Gaullist party called Les Républicains, Republicans, which is the counterpart of the Tories in the UK. So at this election last Sunday, the first party, the socialist candidate, got less than 2% of the share of the vote, whereas the Conservative candidate got less than 5%. So that, coming from parties which used to be in the high 30s in terms of votes, and who govern France, in turn for the past 40 years. This is a dramatic fall, and those parties are now in ruins electorally, but also in terms of membership, in terms of support in general in the country.
That's extraordinary. So is that a bit like seeing the Tories and Labour wiped off the political map in this country?
That's the direct equivalence with a similar situation happening in the UK. Of course, there's a void, and the void was filled by new parties, filled by essentially one person and his party, Emmanuel Macron, the French president. I think Macron's political genius has been to be able to appeal to both voters on the centre-left and centre-right. He's done that, and his party called La République En Marche is really a combination of that.
Well, yes, and we're now in a position where we face the second round of the presidential race, and we've essentially got a rerun of the 2017 situation, haven't we, in terms of the candidates? Emmanuel Macron again and Marine Le Pen. So is this going to be a very familiar result again again?
I would say that on the face of it, it seems 2022 seems a carbon copy of 2017 because you have the same candidates. I think the political situation, the national mood has changed very much. First, the point about, let's never forget that it was always a three-horse race. The third candidate, radical left, Jean-Luc Mélenchon, came really very close to qualifying. You know, he was defeated by a whisker by Le Pen. Macron is no longer this new phenomenon in French politics. You know, that 5 years ago, he was untested. He had had a very short spell in government, in a socialist-led cabinet. He was very young then and had never been in politics. He had never been elected for any office whatsoever. And he sounded at the time, at least for a majority of French commentators and French voters, as a kind of a liberal-minded, economically liberal, but also politically liberal, modernizer on the center of the political spectrum. 5 years on, the situation is different because, you know, he governed for 5 years, he presided, and he's made, of course, as you would expect, a few enemies down the line. Particularly, a lot of observers would agree that the centrism has gone. It's now a politician which has drifted to the right. He's a new conservative leader of a new conservative force, economically, but also on law and order issues, on questions of multiculturalism, always very sensitive issue of Islam and the role of Muslims in French society. For all of this, I think it's been a disappointment for liberal-minded people. I think, in a sense, a lot of people expected a kind of French Justin Trudeau, if you like, 5 years ago, and they didn't get that. They got someone who was more conservative than that.
And he's up against Marine Le Pen, once again, as you say, the leader of the far-right party.
This time around, there was a different situation, i.e. you had a second far-right candidate with Éric Zemmour. For a very long time, in fact, Zemmour looked like he could really challenge Le Pen on the right. And Le Pen now seems to have a sort of smoother image. And although her policies haven't changed, it's still far-right policies, is that Zemmour has very extreme views on Islam, on immigration, on migrants, on law and order. It turned out, you know, finally that that was too much, and that probably scared off and also put off some voters. That's why, in the end, he didn't do so well. Suddenly, Le Pen is seen by many, including in France, as a moderate figure politically, and that's because, by comparison with Zemmour being so extreme on his views, that Le Pen was astute enough not to go along that kind of discourse. On the contrary, she focused on bread and butter issues, socioeconomic issues, purchasing power, cost of living, public services. And that's why some claim that now she's a more moderate figure. I think we can dispute that, because when looking at her main flagship policy that she's got, which she hasn't changed, but at least in terms of image, there was a great change. And I think Zemmour indirectly helped her.
So what happens now? You talked about the veteran far-left leader Jean-Luc Mélenchon coming a close third behind Le Pen. Can we assume that the votes that had gone to him in the first round will automatically go to Macron?
Mélenchon's voters and what they decide to do in the end is so important. If we look at Mélenchon's electorate, it is very contrasted, very interesting, because this is a man which political commentators in France, and I would do the same, you know, position on the radical left or far left, if you like, populist left. But his electorate is very divided on what is to be done in the second round. And how could voters, you know, of a radical left candidate be ready to vote for the far right? I think it may seem irrational, and you may not be able to condone that, certainly. But I think it shows one thing, is that there are those people who are ready to vote for Le Pen, or despite being on the radical left, probably don't want a new term for Macron. Mélenchon himself has been quite ambivalent, because he declared on Sunday that no vote, not a single vote, should go to Le Pen. However, he didn't stipulate whether his voters should vote for Macron. He didn't do it. So in a way, he implicitly condoned abstention, and abstention might be a problem for Macron.
So how feasible is it that France could end up with a far-right president? What will happen if Marine Le Pen wins?
I think let me state a paradox here. There is no majority in France for the far right. The total for the far right is less than 35. This is a remarkable figure in a Western democracy. It's not a majority. So the reason why France might be sleepwalking, so to speak, into electing for the first time since the Vichy regime in the 1940s a far right president, it's because of tactical voting. Exactly the point I was just making about Mélenchon's voters. Some of them detest Macron so much that they are about to vote for either Le Pen or abstain. That's the reason why France, although there's no majority for the far right in the country, might, wake up on Monday with a far right president.
Nabila, who do you think will win?
I think Emmanuel Macron is highly likely to win the presidential election based on the fact that he has improved his rating in the first round of the election compared to 5 years ago. And he's also proven that he doesn't have a serious rival competing against him. I know that we are living in unpredictable times and we're living in an age of disruption when conformity cannot be guaranteed, and in which case, yes, Marine Le Pen has a chance of winning, but because of numerous factors, including her ideology and the fact that she's very much viewed as economically illiterate, it is only a very slim chance. I think Marine Le Pen is someone who also has struggled at elections over decades. Since the early 2000s, she's regularly been rejected both as a presidential candidate and as a would-be member of parliament. She only scraped into the French parliament in 2017, having been rejected by ordinary voters in northern France for years. It was her fourth attempt to become a member of parliament. Her party, the National Rally, only has 6 MPs in the French parliament out of 577 MPs. So, one could argue that the presidential system is a strange one and a powerful individual can succeed alone. But I would contend that turning years of mediocrity into becoming one of the most powerful executive on the planet is pretty unlikely. I think Marine Le Pen is not only likely to win power, but she's even less likely to be able to exert power. She has no significant allies, she has no serious program, and I think that if she scraped into the Élysée Palace for 5 years, they would disappear into an ineffective blur.
My thanks to Philippe Marlière, Nabila Ramdani, and to you for tuning in to the Sky News Daily with me, Anna Jones. This episode was produced and mixed by Soila Aparicio. Josh Gaffson is our junior producer. Philippe Beaumont is the Daily's editor. And if you found this podcast interesting, there are more where you heard this one, and if you can spare a moment, we'd love a review.